The transmission came through at 0300, and I knew from the tone alone that sleep was finished for the night. I had been a military attaché for 11 years, and I had never once received a Priority 1 signal that brought good news. I sat up in my bunk aboard the diplomatic vessel Olive Branch and pressed my thumb to the comms panel. The words that scrolled across the screen were simple enough. Report to the briefing room immediately. Ambassador Bishop requires your presence. My name is Nathan Cole, Commander, United Earth Navy. And on that cold, quiet night, drifting through a corridor of space that no human had ever crossed before, I had no idea that the next 72 hours would decide whether humanity survived as a free species or became property. I found Ambassador Catherine Bishop standing at the center of the briefing room, with her arms folded behind her back, staring at a holographic projection of the largest space station I had ever seen. It was a ring, enormous beyond belief, wrapped around the dying embers of a red dwarf star. Light from the star caught the station's outer hull and made it glow like a band of copper. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. "That is Conclave Station," she said without turning around. "Home of the Conclave of 12. 12 elder species who have governed this sector of the galaxy for 9,000 years. They control trade routes, military corridors, and resource distribution for over 400 civilizations." I stared at the projection. "And they invited us." "Summoned us," she corrected. "There is a difference." She turned to face me, and I noticed the dark circles under her eyes. Catherine Bishop was 53 years old, sharp as a blade, and built for exactly this kind of pressure. But even she looked uneasy. "Humanity has been spacefaring for 78 years. We have one colony on Mars, a handful of research outposts in the outer belt, and 31 combat-capable ships in our entire fleet. The Dralith alone operates 6,000 warships. The Conclave did not invite us because they respect us, Nathan. They invited us because they want to measure us." "Measure us for what?" I asked. She did not answer. She just looked at me with those steady gray eyes and said, "Get dressed. We dock in 4 hours." I returned to my quarters and changed into full dress uniform, and while I adjusted my collar in the mirror, I tried to process what she had told me. I had read the intelligence briefings, of course. Every officer aboard the Olive Branch had been briefed on the Conclave, on its 12 founding species, on the vastness of their combined military and economic power. But briefings were numbers on a screen. They were data points, arranged in neat columns, that you could read and absorb, and file away, without ever truly feeling the weight of what they described. Standing in a small cabin on a small ship, about to dock at a station that dwarfed anything humanity had ever constructed, the numbers became real, and the reality was overwhelming. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a man in a dress uniform that represented a navy with 31 ships. I had been proud of that uniform my entire career. In that moment, I wondered if the beings we were about to meet would even recognize it as military attire. To them, we were probably indistinguishable from our civilian counterparts. Just another variety of small, soft, short-lived creature from a planet they had never heard of until recently. The Olive Branch was not a warship. It had been a science frigate once, built for deep space survey missions, and the diplomatic corps had stripped it down even further before this voyage. No weapons, no armor plating, no defensive systems beyond a basic navigational shield. The idea was to arrive looking exactly as non-threatening as possible. A gesture of good faith, they called it. Standing in the airlock as we approached that massive station, watching warships from a dozen different species drift past us with their gun ports open and their targeting arrays hot, I had a different word for it. I called it insanity. We docked at a port on the station's inner ring, and the moment the airlock cycled open, I understood what we were walking into. The docking bay was the size of a sports arena, and it was full. Ships from every conclave species lined the berths, each one larger and more heavily armed than the last. Dralith cruisers with angular black hulls sat alongside Valori transports that shimmered like oil on water. Cathari gunships bristled with turret arrays that tracked our vessel as we maneuvered into position. Torvan heavy lifters, thick and armored and scarred from centuries of service, occupied the upper berths like sleeping predators, and sitting between all of them, small and white and painfully fragile, was our little science vessel. Nobody had to say it. The visual made the point clearly enough. We were nothing here. A delegation met us at the end of the docking ramp. Two species, standing side by side. The first were Draelith, tall insectoid beings with segmented bodies covered in dark, chitinous plating. Their leader stood nearly 3 meters high, his compound eyes catching the overhead light in fractured patterns. He introduced himself as High Speaker Zorath, and his voice was a low, resonant hum that I felt in my chest more than I heard in my ears. When he spoke, the mandibles on either side of his face moved in complex patterns that added layers of meaning his translated words could not capture. Beside him stood a Velori delegate. The Velori were something else entirely. Fluid-bodied, almost translucent, shifting shape with every subtle movement like living sculpture. This one called itself Salis, and when it spoke, bioluminescent patches across its surface pulsed in soft blues and greens. I was told later that those pulses were the Velori equivalent of facial expressions. At the time, all I noticed was that the patterns looked like amusement. Zorath welcomed us with words that were polite on the surface and hollow underneath. He spoke about the honor of first contact, the significance of new voices, the conclave's long tradition of inclusion and openness to emerging civilizations. His military advisor stood behind him like a statue, compound eyes fixed on Catherine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The other delegates watched from the tiers with the casual interest of spectators at a performance they expected to be brief and unremarkable. A Cathari representative was cleaning its mandibles with a small tool, barely paying attention. A pair of Torvan counselors were conversing quietly in their own language, their massive bodies leaning toward each other with the easy familiarity of colleagues who had done this 1,000 times before. The message was clear without anyone saying it. We were a minor item on the agenda, a formality to be processed and forgotten. Every word Zorath spoke was rehearsed. Every syllable was performance. I had spent enough years in military briefings to recognize when someone was reading from a script they did not believe in. He was going through motions that had been established millennia ago, and he expected us to be grateful for the ritual. Ambassador Bishop thanked him graciously and presented our credentials. Earth's formal request was straightforward. Trade access, mutual non-aggression agreements, cultural exchange programs, the basics of any diplomatic relationship between civilizations. She spoke clearly and without hesitation, and I could see that she had prepared for this moment for years. Every phrase was measured, every gesture was deliberate. She was, in every sense, exactly the representative humanity needed. Zorath listened. He did not interrupt. He let her finish the entire presentation, which took roughly 20 minutes, and when she was done, he tilted his great angular head and asked a single question. Ambassador Bishop, how many warships does your species currently operate? Catherine did not flinch. 31 combat-capable vessels, High Speaker. The silence that followed was suffocating. I watched it move through the chamber like a wave. Zorath's compound eyes shifted. Salis flickered a deep amber. The other delegates, seated in a tiered amphitheater that curved around the central floor, exchanged glances that needed no translation. Then the laughter started. It did not come from Zorath. It came from the upper tiers, from the smaller delegations, the species who had sat through this introduction with mild curiosity and nothing more. A wet, clicking sound from the Cathari, a rumbling vibration from the Torvan, a high, whistling exhale from a species I could not even name. One by one, they joined in, and within seconds, the entire chamber was alive with it. 31 ships. To these people, who counted their fleets in the thousands, who had been building warships before humanity had discovered fire, 31 was not a number. It was a joke. I stood behind Catherine and watched her absorb it. I watched her shoulders stay level, her chin stay up, her hands stay still at her sides. She did not look at me. She did not look at the floor. She looked directly at Zorath and waited for the sound to die. It took a long time. When it finally faded, Zorath raised one clawed hand, and the chamber went quiet. He looked down at Catherine from his full height, and his voice carried a tone I can only describe as pity. 31 ships, he repeated. The Draelith Dominion fields 6,000. The Cathari Confederacy maintains 4,000. Even the Velori, who favor diplomacy over force, operate 1,200 armed transports. He paused and let the numbers settle. Ambassador, your species is very young, very small, very far from home. Perhaps you do not yet understand how things work in this corridor of space. Catherine smiled, not a nervous smile, not a defeated smile, a patient one, the kind of smile that carries information the room is not yet ready to receive. I understand perfectly, High Speaker, and I appreciate the context, but our request remains the same. We are not here to compare fleet sizes, we are here to talk. Zorath stared at her for a moment, and then he made a gesture with his claw that I later learned was the Draelith equivalent of a dismissive shrug. By all means, little species, amuse us. The session was adjourned shortly after. No agreements, no frameworks, no progress. Just a room full of ancient civilizations who had looked at humanity, done the arithmetic, and decided we were not worth the effort. Catherine and I walked back to the olive branch in silence. The corridors of the station were wide and gleaming and full of beings who towered over us, who moved around us without acknowledgement, who looked through us as if we were ghosts. I wanted to say something. I wanted to tell her that we should leave, that this was a waste of time, that these people had already made up their minds about us. But Catherine spoke first. She stopped walking, turned to me, and said, "They will underestimate us, Nathan. Every single one of them. And when the time comes, that will be the only advantage we need." I did not understand what she meant. Not then. I thought she was talking about the power of persistence, about wearing them down through patience and stubbornness. I thought it was motivational rhetoric, the kind of thing diplomats say to keep morale from crumbling. I was wrong. She was not being metaphorical. She was being precise. But I would not learn that for another 3 days. And by then, the laughter would already be dying in their throats. That was their first mistake. Not the laughing, the letting us continue. The 3 days that followed were the longest of my life. Every single hour, measured in small humiliations, stacked one on top of the other, like bricks in a wall, designed to keep us out. On the first morning, the conclave formally assigned Earth a designation. They called it Provisional Observer Status, and the Valori clerk who delivered the documentation did so with the mechanical indifference of someone filing paperwork for a broken ventilation unit. I read through the terms with Catherine in our cramped quarters aboard the Olive Branch. The two of us hunched over a tablet on a fold-down table, while the hum of the station's reactor vibrated through the hull. No voting rights, no trade access, no protection under conclave security agreements. We could attend sessions. We could speak when invited. We could not propose policy, lodge complaints, or request arbitration. We were furniture. Expensive furniture that had traveled 400 light-years to sit in the corner and watch. Catherine signed the document without hesitation. "You cannot be serious," I said. "I am completely serious." She set the tablet down and looked at me with an expression I had seen before on the faces of poker players who were holding cards nobody suspected. "We accept what they offer. We smile. We attend every session. We take every meeting they grant us, and we do not complain. They are treating us like servants. They are treating us like something they do not yet fear," she said. "There is a very important difference. Fear makes people cautious. Contempt makes them careless. Right now, I want them careless." I did not argue. Catherine Bishop was not the kind of woman you argued with when her mind was made up. She had spent 20 years in Earth's foreign service, negotiated hostage situations on 3 continents, brokered the Mars Colony Autonomy Accords, and once talked a rogue military commander into standing down without a single shot being fired. When Catherine Bishop told you to smile, you smiled, even when your jaw ached from the effort. The formal sessions were exercises in deliberate exclusion. The conclave debated resource allocation for border systems, trade tariffs on refined minerals, military patrol rotations through contested corridors, decisions that affected hundreds of worlds and billions of beings, made by 12 species who had been doing this for millennia. Earth was permitted to observe from a gallery reserved for non-member species, a small balcony at the rear of the amphitheater where the acoustics were poor, and the seating was designed for bodies shaped nothing like ours. I spent hours perched on a bench built for something with 4 legs and a tail, watching galactic policy being decided by creatures who did not know my name and did not care to learn it. During breaks between sessions, We walked the station's public corridors and marketplaces, and I cataloged everything I saw. Commerce here operated on a scale that made Earth's largest cities look like village markets. Dralith merchants sold refined metals from asteroid mines that had been operating for 3,000 years. Cathari engineers offered navigation software that could plot courses through gravitational anomalies our best computers could not even model. Valori artisans traded in living light sculptures, delicate constructions of bioluminescent material that rearranged themselves in response to the emotions of whoever was nearby. The sheer depth of what the galaxy had to offer was staggering, and all of it was behind a wall that we could see through but never touch. A Valori merchant noticed Catherine examining a light sculpture and offered to explain how it worked. When Catherine asked the price, the merchant gently informed her that provisional observers did not have trading privileges. The sculpture dimmed, as if responding to the awkwardness of the moment, and we moved on. On the second evening, there was a formal banquet. Every conclave delegation attended, each bringing their own food, their own customs, their own ideas of celebration. The Dralith ate something that looked like raw crystal, and made grinding sounds with their mandibles that I assumed was conversation. The Torvan consumed a thick, steaming paste from communal bowls, and the smell alone was enough to make my eyes water from across the room. The Cathari stood in tight clusters and shared small, dense cubes of something dark and shiny, passing them from hand to hand with a ritual precision that suggested ceremony more than sustenance. The Valori did not eat at all. They absorbed nutrients through their skin, from shallow pools of luminescent liquid, and during the banquet, they arranged themselves around these pools, like living sculptures, their bodies pulsing with slow, rhythmic light. Catherine circulated through the room, with the ease of someone who had attended 1,000 functions like this one. She introduced herself to every delegate, learned every name, asked questions about their homeworlds and their cultures and their histories. Most of them were polite in the way powerful people are polite to those they consider irrelevant. They answered her questions with short, practiced responses and moved on quickly. A Cathari delegate told her that humanity's biosphere sounded charmingly primitive. A Torvan counselor expressed surprise that we had achieved space travel, given the apparent limitations of your biology. Catherine thanked each of them for their insights and moved on, gathering information, building a map of the room's power dynamics that only she could see. I stayed near the wall, watching the room, doing what military attaches do, observing, cataloging, noting which species talked to which, who deferred to whom, where the alliances were, and where the fractures hid. It was during this quiet surveillance that Saelis found me. The Valori delegate drifted across the floor with that liquid, boneless movement their species was known for, and stopped directly in front of me. Up close, Saelis was mesmerizing. Patterns of blue and green light chased each other across a body that seemed to have no fixed shape, reforming constantly like a reflection on moving water. Two large, dark eyes regarded me from what I assumed was a face, though the boundaries between face and body were uncertain. "Commander Cole," Saelis said, and the voice was surprisingly gentle, melodic almost. "You stand apart from your ambassador. Is this by choice or by instruction?" "By training," I said. "I observe. She engages. A sensible division." Saelis paused, and the bioluminescent patterns shifted to something slower and more subdued. "May I ask you something directly, Commander? I find that military minds tend to appreciate directness." "Go ahead. Why did your species send an unarmed vessel?" I had been expecting this question from someone, eventually. We were invited to a diplomatic summit. We came prepared for diplomacy. Saelis regarded me for a long moment. Every species that has ever appeared before the conclave brought weapons, not because they intended to use them, but because display is the foundation of respect in this chamber. The Dralith earned their seat by destroying a rival fleet in full view of the original council. The Cathari annexed 3 systems before they were granted membership. Even my own people, the Valori, arrived with a fleet of 200 ships. We did not fire a single shot, but we made certain everyone knew we could. "And we brought a science vessel," I said. "Yes," Saelis flickered amber. "You brought a science vessel, with no weapons, no escort, no defensive capability beyond basic navigation shielding. Commander, I have studied your species since the invitation was extended. You are not stupid. You are not naive. So I must ask the harder question. Are you brave, or are you hiding something? Before I could answer, Catherine appeared beside me. She had a talent for arriving at exactly the right moment, materializing out of a crowd the way a card player produces the ace they had palmed 3 hands ago. Delegate Saelis, she said warmly. I hope Commander Cole is being hospitable. He is being evasive, Saelis said, which I suppose is a form of hospitality. Catherine laughed, genuine and unforced, and for a brief moment, even Saelis seemed charmed. But the Valori's patterns shifted again, cycling through deeper colors, and when Saelis spoke next, the gentleness was gone. Ambassador Bishop, I will tell you something that no other delegate in this room will say to you, because none of them believe you are worth the effort of honesty. The Draelith did not invite Earth to join the conclave. They invited Earth to be evaluated. There are only 2 outcomes to this evaluation. You will be absorbed into the conclave as a vassal state, providing resources and labor in exchange for nominal protection, or you will be classified as an unprotected system, which means anyone with sufficient military power can take what they want from your worlds without consequence. The banquet noise continued around us, but in our small corner of the room, everything had gone very still. Catherine's smile did not waver. And which outcome does the conclave prefer? The Draelith prefer vassalage. It is tidier. But they will accept the alternative if you refuse. Saelis's body dimmed, the light drawing inward. I tell you this not because I wish to frighten you. I tell you because in 9,000 years of conclave history, no species has ever been offered a third option, and I am curious whether yours will find one. Saelis drifted away after that, leaving Catherine and me standing alone beside a table of food we could not eat, in a room full of beings who had already decided our fate. I turned to Catherine. Did you know about the evaluation? I suspected from the day we received the invitation. Saelis just confirmed it. Then what are we doing here? If the game is rigged, if they have already decided that we are either property or prey, why are we still playing? Catherine picked up a glass of water from the table, the only thing in the entire banquet hall that a human could consume, and took a slow sip. She held the glass for a moment, looking at the liquid as though it contained answers she was still deciding whether to share. Then she set it down and said, "We are not playing their game, Nathan. We are waiting for the right moment to change it." On the 3rd day, everything accelerated. The conclave's administrative body delivered a formal document to our quarters aboard the Olive Branch. It was titled Standard Integration Framework, and it was 400 pages long, written in the conclave's legal language, with a rough translation appended in English. Catherine and I read it together, page by page, sitting across from each other at that same cramped table, and with every paragraph the true nature of the offer became clearer. Earth would provide unrestricted access to its mineral reserves. Earth would supply biological samples from its biosphere for conclave research programs. Earth would contribute a labor allocation of no fewer than 50,000 individuals per cycle to conclave infrastructure projects. Earth would not develop independent military technology beyond its current capability. Earth would submit all scientific research to conclave review before publication or application. In exchange, the conclave would designate Earth as a protected territory, meaning no member species could invade or exploit it without conclave approval. The protection was conditional. It could be revoked at any time by a simple majority vote. It was not a partnership. It was not even vassalage in the traditional sense. It was ownership with better vocabulary. Catherine read the final page, set the tablet down, and closed her eyes. For a full minute she sat in silence, and I watched the tension move through her shoulders, her jaw, her hands. I could see the weight of what this document represented pressing down on her, and I understood for the first time that Catherine's composure was not effortless. It was a discipline, a decision she made fresh every single hour. Then she opened her eyes and said, "Get me a secure channel to Earth Command. Priority Alpha, encrypted, tightest band we have." I set up the connection. It took 7 minutes to establish the link across 400 light-years of relayed signal buoys, and when it was ready, Catherine sat down at the console, and typed a message I was not permitted to see. She transmitted it, waited for the confirmation ping, and then shut down the channel. "What did you send?" I asked. She looked at me, and for the first time since we had arrived, I saw something behind her composure that I recognized. It was not fear, it was anticipation, the look of someone who had been holding a breath for a very long time and was about to let it out. "I sent the word no," she said, "and a request." "A request for what?" She stood up and straightened her jacket. "You will know when it arrives, Nathan. For now, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" I had served under officers who asked for trust and did not deserve it. I had followed orders from people who spent lives like currency and called it strategy. Catherine Bishop was not one of those people. She had never lied to me. She had never asked me to do something she would not do herself. And she had never, not once, looked uncertain. "I trust you," I said. She nodded. "Good, because tomorrow I am going to walk into that chamber and tell the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy that Earth declines their generous offer. And after that, things are going to move very quickly." I did not sleep that night. I sat in the observation lounge of the Olive Branch and stared out at the Conclave station, at the warships drifting past like predators circling a reef, and I tried to imagine what Catherine had requested from Earth Command that gave her the confidence to refuse an ultimatum from 12 species who could crush us without effort. I could not imagine it. My military mind ran the numbers over and over, and every calculation came out the same: 31 ships, 1 colony, 78 years of spaceflight, against 9,000 years of galactic dominance. The math did not work, not in any scenario I could construct. But Catherine had asked me to trust her, and so I sat in that quiet lounge and waited for morning, not knowing that the answer to every question I had was already in transit, moving through the dark between stars, heading straight for us. I did not know what she had called for, not yet, but I noticed she had stopped smiling, and she had started counting hours. The morning of the 4th day began with silence, and silence in a place like Conclave Station was never a good sign. I had learned over 3 days that the station was a living thing, constantly humming with the movement of ships, the chatter of comms traffic, the deep vibration of its massive reactor cores. But when Catherine and I walked through the corridors toward the main assembly chamber, the usual background noise had thinned. Delegations that normally filled the hallways were absent. Doors that had been open were sealed. Something had shifted overnight, and I could feel it in the air like static before a storm. Catherine felt it too. She walked faster than usual, her heels clicking against the polished floor with a rhythm that sounded almost military. She had dressed carefully that morning, in the formal black suit reserved for addresses of significance, and she had pinned Earth's diplomatic seal to her lapel with hands that were perfectly steady. I had watched her prepare in silence, and the only thing she had said to me was, "Stay close, Nathan, and whatever happens in that chamber, do not react, do not speak, do not move. Let me handle everything." I had nodded, but my hand had instinctively checked the sidearm I was not carrying, because we had left our weapons on Earth, and the absence of that familiar weight felt more dangerous than ever. The assembly chamber was full when we arrived, and that alone was unusual. For the past 3 days, sessions had been attended by representatives and aides, perhaps 100 beings at most, in a space designed for thousands. Today, every tier was occupied. Every delegation was present at full strength. The Draelith had brought their military advisors, tall and armored and standing at rigid attention behind High Speaker Zorath like a wall of dark chitin. The Cathari had deployed their security detail, compact and heavily built beings with dense, stone-colored skin and eyes like polished obsidian. Even the Valori had expanded their presence, with Saelis at the center of a group of 6 delegates whose bioluminescent patterns were cycling through deep reds and purples that I had never seen before. They knew something was coming. I could feel it in the weight of the room, in the way every delegate leaned forward in their seat, in the charged, expectant quality of the silence. Whether Catherine's refusal had leaked, or whether the conclave simply had 9,000 years of instinct for moments of consequence, the chamber was ready for something to happen. They were waiting for us. All of them. Catherine descended the steps to the central floor without hesitation. I followed 3 paces behind, exactly as protocol demanded, and took my position at the edge of the speaking platform. The chamber was quiet, but it was the quiet of a held breath, not the quiet of disinterest. Every compound eye, every sensory organ, every receptor in the room was focused on the human woman walking calmly to the center of the floor. Zorath spoke first. His voice was measured, formal, stripped of the casual condescension that had marked our earlier interactions. Ambassador Bishop, the conclave has reviewed your credentials and your requests. We have extended to your species the standard integration framework, as is customary for newly contacted civilizations. Have you had sufficient time to review the terms? I have, High Speaker. Thank you for the thoroughness of the document. And has your government authorized you to accept? Catherine paused. It was a deliberate pause, perfectly timed, and I recognized it from years of watching her work. She was letting the room lean forward. She was creating space for the words that followed, to land with maximum weight. The entire chamber seemed to hold its breath with her. 12 species suspended in that fraction of silence. My government has authorized me to respectfully decline. The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then the chamber erupted. Not in laughter this time, in something harder, sharper. I heard the clicking of Cathari mandibles, the deep rumbling of Torvan delegates shifting in their seats, the high-pitched whistle of species I could not name, expressing what I could only interpret as disbelief. Conversations broke out across the tiers, rapid exchanges in languages our translators struggled to process, and the ambient temperature of the room seemed to drop as the collective mood shifted from curiosity to something far more dangerous. Zorath raised one massive clawed hand, and the noise subsided, but the tension remained, coiled and waiting. You decline, Zorath repeated, as though the word itself was foreign to this chamber. Ambassador, I want to ensure there is no misunderstanding. You are declining the protection and partnership of the 12 most powerful civilizations in this sector of the galaxy. You are doing this on behalf of a species that operates 31 ships, occupies 2 worlds, and has existed as a spacefaring civilization for less than a single Draelith generation. That is correct, High Speaker. Zorath's compound eyes narrowed, the fractured light within them darkening, and his voice dropped into a register that vibrated in the floor beneath my feet. Then let me explain what this decline means, so that there can be no ambiguity. The standard integration framework is not merely an offer. It is the mechanism by which the conclave determines the status of newly contacted species. Those who accept receive protection, trade access, and a path toward eventual membership. Those who decline are classified as unprotected systems. He paused, and the room grew colder. An unprotected system, Ambassador, is a system without rights under conclave law. It cannot appeal to conclave courts. It cannot request military assistance. It cannot invoke trade agreements or dispute resolution protocols. And any member species with the capability and desire to extract resources from an unprotected system is free to do so, without limit, without oversight, without consequence. The words hung in the air, and I watched Catherine absorb them without a flicker of change in her expression. Behind me, I could hear the other non-member observers stirring in the gallery. Small species who had accepted integration long ago. Species who understood exactly what Zorath was describing because they had been given the same choice and had chosen differently. They had chosen survival over sovereignty, and now they watched a species from a planet they had never heard of choose the opposite. Catherine nodded slowly. I understand the implications, High Speaker, and I appreciate your clarity. Earth declines the framework, and we accept the consequences of that decision. Then you will reconsider? Zorath pressed, and there was something in his voice that almost sounded like genuine advice, as though some small part of him was trying to save this foolish, tiny species from itself. No. Zorath stared at her, and for the first time I saw something in his posture that was not amusement or condescension. It was confusion. Pure, genuine confusion, the kind that comes from encountering a variable that does not fit into any existing model. In 9,000 years of conclave history, no species had ever declined the framework, Not once. Every civilization that had stood on this floor had looked at the math, the same math that had kept me awake every night since we arrived, and they had reached the same conclusion: accept or be consumed. And now a woman from a planet they had been laughing at 3 days ago was standing in the center of their chamber and saying no. Zorath turned to the assembled delegates. When he spoke, it was not to Catherine, it was to the room. The human delegation has declined integration. Under Conclave Statute 731, this triggers a 40-rotation review period during which the petitioning species may reconsider. If no reconsideration is received, the system-designated soul will be reclassified as unprotected, and all associated provisions will take immediate effect. He looked back at Catherine. 40 rotations, Ambassador. I suggest you use them wisely. I suggest you consult with your government, with whatever military advisors you have access to, and understand the full scope of what reclassification means for your people. We are not offering this warning out of cruelty. We are offering it because destroying a species is less efficient than integrating one, and efficiency is a virtue this conclave values. The deliberate framing of it staggered me. He was telling us, in plain language, that the choice was between servitude and being stripped for parts, and he was presenting it as a courtesy, as generosity. I looked around the chamber and saw delegates nodding, not in agreement with the ultimatum specifically, but with the tone of it, the paternalistic, almost bored certainty of beings who had delivered this exact speech to dozens of species before us, and who fully expected the same outcome every time: compliance, gratitude, submission. But Catherine did not step back. She remained exactly where she was, feet planted, shoulders square, and she said something that I will remember for the rest of my life. Hi, Speaker Zorath. I have one final question before this session is adjourned. Is this the Conclave's final position? Integration or abandonment? There is no third option, no room for negotiation, for amendment, for the possibility that a new species might bring something to this council that your existing framework does not account for. Zorath's mandibles twitched, and I saw irritation in the movement. That is the Conclave's position. It has been the Conclave's position for 9,000 years. It has served 12 civilizations and 400 subordinate species without amendment. We do not change our foundations to accommodate curiosities. Catherine nodded again, slow and deliberate. Then she said, very quietly, but with a voice that carried to every corner of that vast chamber, "Then I have nothing further to say, but someone else might." Before Zorath could respond, before anyone in the room could process what she had said, the station's proximity alarms activated. I had spent enough time in military environments to know what that sound meant. Every nerve in my body fired at once. The alarm was a deep, pulsing tone that rose and fell in steady waves, and it was accompanied by a rapid flashing of amber lights along the chamber walls. Around the room, delegates reacted with varying degrees of alarm. The Cathari security detail drew weapons, short, angular devices that hummed with contained energy. The Torvon delegates rose to their full height, which was considerable, their massive bodies tensing in postures I recognized as defensive. The Velori contracted into tighter, more defensive shapes, their bioluminescence flaring bright white, in what I now understood was the equivalent of a startled gasp. Zorath turned to his military advisor, a Draelith officer in dark ceremonial armor, and spoke rapidly in a language I did not understand. The officer touched a device on his wrist and projected a tactical display into the center of the chamber, a three-dimensional map of the space surrounding Conclave Station. Something was coming, something large. It was exiting faster than light transit at the edge of the system, decelerating at a rate that the station's sensors were struggling to calculate. There was no transponder code, no identification signal, no communication on any frequency. Just a single contact, massive and dark, and closing the distance between the outer boundary and the station at a speed that should not have been possible. The chamber transformed around me. In the span of seconds, the atmosphere shifted from political theater to something primal, something that transcended the differences between 12 species and reduced them all to the same fundamental instinct: threat recognition. The Draelith military advisors formed a tight cordon around Zorath, their armored bodies clicking into defensive formations that looked rehearsed and ancient. The Cathari security officers spread out across the chamber floor, their weapons raised, scanning the dome overhead, as though the unknown vessel might materialize inside the station itself. Even the Valori, who I had come to think of as the most composed beings in the room, had contracted into tight defensive clusters, their bioluminescence cycling through rapid patterns of red and white that I now understood meant alarm. Catherine stood alone on the central platform amid all of it, perfectly still, perfectly calm, watching the chaos unfold around her with an expression that was impossible to read. I wanted to go to her. Protocol demanded I stay where I was. I stayed. Zorath's voice cut through the rising noise. Identify that vessel. All defensive grids to active status. Scramble perimeter patrols immediately. The sensor officer worked frantically, his clawed hands moving across the projected display with practiced speed. Data streams cascaded across the image, filtering through the Conclave's identification database, comparing the incoming vessel against every known ship class, from every known species in the catalog. The database held records going back millennia, entries for warships and freighters and exploration craft from civilizations that had risen and fallen while humanity was still learning to plant crops. Nothing matched. High speaker, the sensor officer reported, and even through the alien structure of his voice, I could hear the uncertainty. The vessel does not correspond to any registered class in the Conclave database. Hull composition is unknown. Drive signature does not match any cataloged propulsion system. Estimated mass is... He paused, recalculated, and paused again, as though the numbers he was seeing could not possibly be correct. Estimated mass is 17 times the displacement of a Drelith command carrier. 17 times. I felt that number in my stomach like a physical blow. A Drelith command carrier was the largest class of warship in the known galaxy. The vessel approaching the station was 17 times its size. Zorath turned to Catherine. His compound eyes were fully dilated now, the fractured light within them burning with an intensity I had not seen before. Ambassador Bishop, do you know anything about this vessel? Catherine was still standing in the center of the floor. She had not moved when the alarms began. She had not flinched when the lights started flashing. She had not even turned to look at the tactical display. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, her expression calm, and she looked at Zorath with eyes that were steady and clear and held not a trace of surprise. I might, she said. Before Zorath could press the question, the sensor display updated. The vessel had cleared FTL transit and was now moving through normal space, decelerating smoothly and adjusting its approach vector with a precision that suggested navigational computation far beyond anything the Conclave used. The sensor officer zoomed in on the contact, and for the first time, the chamber saw its shape. It was long, impossibly long. The sensor grid rendered it as a dark, angular silhouette against the faint glow of distant stars, and even as a wireframe projection on a holographic display, it commanded the room. The hull was layered, complex, covered in geometric patterns that the sensors could not resolve into familiar structural components. It was not organic, but it was not mechanical in any way the Conclave understood. It was something else entirely, something new. The officer spoke again, and this time his voice was very small. High speaker, the vessel's hull is emitting adaptive electromagnetic signatures. Our targeting systems cannot establish a stable lock. The vessel is broadcasting on all frequencies. He listened to his earpiece, and I watched his body go rigid. It is broadcasting a single message, repeating. What does it say? The officer looked at Zorath, then looked at Catherine, and then looked back at his display, as though hoping the data would somehow rearrange itself into something less alarming. It says, "The people of Earth declare sovereign independence under their own laws. This vessel is the guarantor of that independence. We do not seek conflict, but we will not accept subjugation." The chamber went silent. Not the polite silence of diplomatic proceedings, not the contemptuous silence that had followed our fleet numbers 3 days ago. This was the silence of 12 ancient civilizations realizing, all at the same moment, that they had made a catastrophic miscalculation about the small, unarmed, seemingly harmless species standing in the center of their chamber. I watched the realization move through the room like a wave. The Cathari delegate who had called our biosphere charmingly primitive 2 days ago was staring at the sensor display with his mouth slightly open. The Torvan counselor, who had questioned whether our biology was sufficient for space travel, was gripping the arms of his seat so tightly that the material was cracking under his fingers. Everywhere I looked, I saw the same expression translated across a dozen different anatomies. The expression of creatures who had just discovered that the small thing they had been ignoring in the corner of the room was not small at all. Zorath's military advisor leaned close to the high speaker and spoke rapidly, urgently, in their native tongue. I could not understand the words, but I could read the body language perfectly. The advisor was telling his commander that they had a problem, a very large problem, and the commander, for perhaps the first time in his long career, did not have an immediate answer. Catherine looked at me. Just a glance, just a brief meeting of eyes across the chamber floor, and in that glance, I saw everything she had been holding back for 3 days. Every calculation she had been running behind that patient smile. Every second she had been counting since she sent that coded message to Earth. She sat back down, folded her hands in her lap, and said nothing. She did not need to. The station was already trembling under the gravitational shadow of the ship that had just arrived. And I finally understood what she had requested from Earth Command. She had requested the end of pretending. The observation dome of the conclave assembly chamber was a masterpiece of alien engineering, a seamless curve of transparent material that offered an unobstructed view of the space surrounding the station. For 9,000 years, delegates had looked through that dome at their warships, their trade fleets, their symbols of power, arranged in careful formations, designed to impress and intimidate. Today, every eye in the chamber was fixed on the dome, and what they saw changed everything. The ship emerged from the dark between stars, like something that had always been there, and had simply chosen to stop hiding. It was enormous. Not large the way warships are large, where you can look at the hull and estimate the tonnage and understand the scale through comparison. This was enormous, the way geography is enormous, the way you look at a mountain range from a distance and your brain quietly refuses to accept that something built by hands could be that size. Nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, with a beam width that made the Drelith command carriers look like escort shuttles by comparison. Its hull was dark, almost black, but it was not a dead or passive surface. It moved. Panels shifted and realigned as I watched, responding to some internal logic I could not decipher, and where the faint light of the red dwarf star caught the plating, it reflected colors that had no business existing on a warship. Deep bronze, midnight blue, a strange, shifting violet that seemed to pulse with its own faint rhythm. The hull was alive in a way that defied easy description, and the effect was profoundly unsettling. It was like watching something breathe. The ship carried no visible weapons, no gun ports, no turret arrays, no missile tubes, nothing that any species in the chamber could identify as armament. And that, more than anything else, was what frightened them. Because every civilization in the conclave understood a fundamental truth about military technology. When you cannot see the weapons are worse than anything you imagined. I stared at the vessel through the dome and felt my own understanding of the world rearrange itself. I was military. I had served in Earth's Navy for 11 years. I held a top-secret clearance. I had attended briefings at the highest levels of Fleet Command, and I had been told, in those briefings, that I was seeing the full picture of Earth's military capability. And I had never seen this ship. I had never heard of this ship. I had never even heard a rumor that something like this existed. Catherine was standing beside me, watching the chamber react, and I turned to her with a question that was less a question and more a demand. "What is that?" She looked at me, and for the first time since we had met, her composure softened into something almost apologetic. "That is the Sovereign, and I am sorry I could not tell you sooner." The Sovereign, I said the name out loud, and it felt heavy on my tongue. "How long has Earth been building that?" "Since the beginning," she said quietly, "since we first detected signals from other civilizations and realized we were not alone in this galaxy. Since the intelligence community concluded that a universe full of older, stronger species would eventually come calling, and that when they did, we needed to have an answer that could not be argued with. 78 years. We have been building that thing for 78 years? Every resource we could spare without arousing suspicion. Every physicist, every engineer, Every materials scientist, who could be trusted with the most closely guarded secret in human history. The public fleet, the 31 ships. They were real. They were functional. But they were also a screen. The Sovereign was the actual program. The real investment. Everything else was theater designed to make us look exactly as small and harmless as we needed the galaxy to believe we were. The chamber had descended into controlled chaos. Zorath was issuing orders to his military staff, his voice sharp and commanding, cutting through the noise with the authority of someone accustomed to absolute control. 6 Dralith cruisers detached from their docking positions and moved to intercept the Sovereign, their engines flaring blue-white as they accelerated into attack formation. They were sleek, angular predators, each one bristling with weapon arrays that had been designed and refined over centuries to destroy vessels exactly like the one that now hung in their sky. Except no vessel like this had ever existed before. I watched the cruisers approach on the tactical display, 6 icons converging on the single, massive contact at the center of the projection. They reached optimal weapons range and began targeting procedures. I had seen enough combat simulations to know what came next. Lock, confirm, fire. They locked. They confirmed. And then every single system on every single cruiser shut down simultaneously. It was not a dramatic explosion. There was no burst of light, no shower of debris, no visible beam or projectile. It was quiet, almost gentle. The cruisers simply went dark. Their engines died mid-burn, the blue-white flare cutting off like a candle being snuffed. Their weapons powered down, their running lights extinguished, their navigation arrays, their communication systems, their sensor grids, everything that made them warships rather than empty metal husks, just stopped. 6 vessels, each one capable of reducing a small moon to rubble, transformed in an instant into 6 pieces of drifting metal. The sensor officer's voice trembled as he reported, "High speaker. All 6 interceptors have lost primary power. Secondary systems are non-responsive. Life support is functioning on emergency backup reserves. Weapons systems are offline. Navigation is offline. Communications are offline. Crews are alive but unable to operate any ship function." "What happened?" Zorath demanded. The human vessel emitted a localized pulse. Duration was less than 1 second. It carried no explosive or kinetic payload. It was a directed electromagnetic event that targeted and overloaded every major system on all 6 ships simultaneously. The officer paused, and when he continued, his voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. "High speaker. The pulse was precisely calibrated. It disabled military and navigation systems, while leaving life support and emergency systems intact. It did not damage the hull structure. It did not injure any crew member. It was not an attack. It was a demonstration. A demonstration." That word echoed through the chamber, and I watched its meaning sink into 12 delegations at 12 different speeds. The Cathari security detail lowered their weapons slightly, exchanging glances that communicated a rapid tactical reassessment. 2 of their officers holstered their sidearms entirely, which I understood instinctively was not a gesture of submission, but of pragmatism. There was nothing in this room they could shoot that would change what had just happened. The Torvan, who had been standing in aggressive postures, slowly sat back down, their massive bodies settling into their seats with a heaviness that seemed more than physical. The smaller delegations in the upper tiers went very quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from realizing the rules of the game have just been rewritten while you were still playing by the old ones. I saw one delegate from a species I did not recognize lean over to a colleague and speak rapidly in hushed tones. The colleague shook its head, slowly, back and forth, the universal gesture of disbelief. Another delegate had pulled up a personal display and was scrolling through data with frantic speed, searching for any record, any precedent, any example, in 9,000 years of galactic history, of a single vessel neutralizing 6 warships simultaneously without causing physical damage. I could have saved the delegate the trouble. There was no precedent. This had never happened before. Zorath turned on Catherine with a fury that filled the chamber. His full height was on display now, nearly 3 meters of armored chitin and ancient authority, and his voice shook the floor when he spoke. "You dare? You enter this station under the banner of diplomacy, you submit to our processes, you play at humility, and all the while, You have this weapon waiting in the dark? Catherine faced him without stepping back. She was a full meter shorter than the Draelith leader, and she had no armor, no weapons, no guards, nothing between her and the most powerful being in the room except the sound of her own voice. And her voice was absolutely level. High Speaker Zorath, the Sovereign did not fire on your ships. It did not destroy them. It did not injure a single member of their crews. It demonstrated, clearly and without ambiguity, that it has the capacity to neutralize military threats without taking lives. That is not aggression. That is restraint. It is a provocation. It is a deterrent. Catherine's voice hardened, and for the first time, I heard the iron underneath the diplomacy. For 3 days, I have stood in this chamber and presented my species' case for equal partnership. I have been laughed at. I have been dismissed. I have been told that my civilization is a curiosity. I have been handed a document that would have reduced my people to a labor pool for species who consider us amusing. I accepted every indignity because I believed, and still believe, that diplomacy is the correct path forward. But diplomacy without consequence is begging, and humanity does not beg. The chamber was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat and the distant hum of the station's reactor, and nothing else. Catherine continued, and her voice carried the weight of 78 years of preparation, of generations of scientists and engineers who had worked in secret toward this single moment. Earth has spent its entire spacefaring existence preparing for this day. We hoped we would never need the Sovereign. We hoped that when we finally met the wider galaxy, we would be met with curiosity and goodwill, and a genuine desire for mutual benefit. We built our diplomatic vessel unarmed as proof of that hope. But we also built the Sovereign as proof that hope is not the same as naivety. She turned to face the wider chamber, addressing not just Zorath but every delegate, every species, every pair of eyes that had watched humanity walk into this room and laughed. The Sovereign represents everything my species is capable of when it focuses on a single goal. One ship, one vessel, designed to make numbers irrelevant. You field thousands of warships, and we built one that can silence them without firing a shot. Not because we want to fight you, not because we want to dominate anyone, because we needed to make sure that when we said we wanted peace, you would take us seriously. Salais, the Valori delegate, broke the tension with a question that cut through the anger and the fear and the posturing, and found something true underneath. Ambassador Bishop, you came to this station unarmed. You came knowing the Sovereign was behind you. You endured 3 days of humiliation, knowing at any moment you could have called it forward. Why did you wait? Catherine looked at Salais, and the hardness in her voice softened, not into weakness, into something more honest, something that sounded like the real Catherine Bishop, the woman behind the diplomat, the person who had carried this burden quietly for longer than I could imagine. Because I wanted to give diplomacy a chance, she said. A real chance. Not the kind of chance where you arrive with a fleet at your back and everyone agrees because they are afraid. I wanted to stand in this chamber as a representative of a young, small, newly arrived species, and I wanted to ask for partnership on the merits of the idea itself. I wanted to see if this conclave, with all its history and all its power and all its wisdom, was capable of fairness. She paused, and the pause was not for effect this time. It was real. It was not. So now we are having a different conversation. Zorath stood motionless for a long time. The fury was still there, coiled in his posture and his clenched claws, but something else was competing with it. I watched the calculation happen behind those compound eyes, the rapid assessment of a military mind confronting a new variable that did not fit any existing tactical model. The Sovereign had disabled 6 cruisers in less than a second without causing any permanent damage. What else could it do? What would happen if the Conclave committed its full fleet? How many ships would go dark before the rest turned away? And what technology made such precise, targeted disruption possible from a single vessel against multiple targets simultaneously? He did not know, and that uncertainty was more powerful than any weapon the Sovereign actually carried. Because a weapon you understand can be countered, planned for, defended against. A weapon you do not understand is infinite in your imagination. Every scenario Zorath constructed in his mind was worse than the last, because he had no data to constrain his projections, no intelligence to bound his estimates. The Sovereign was not just a ship. It was a question mark the size of a small moon, and the Conclave had no answer for it. Around the chamber, I could see the same calculation happening independently in every delegation. Military advisors were conferring in hushed tones. Tactical officers were running simulations on personal devices and coming up empty. The room was full of the most experienced strategists in the galaxy, and not one of them could tell their leader what the Sovereign would do next. That paralysis was worth more than 1,000 warships. "What do you want, Ambassador?" Zorath asked, and his voice was quieter now. Not defeated, not yet, but fundamentally changed. The condescension was gone. The amusement was gone. What remained was the voice of a leader who was encountering, perhaps for the first time in his life, a situation his experience had not prepared him for. Catherine answered immediately, without hesitation, without negotiation, without adjusting a single word from the request she had made on the very first day. "The same thing I wanted when I walked into this chamber 4 days ago. Trade access, mutual non-aggression agreements, cultural exchange, equal membership in the Conclave with full rights, full protections, and a full vote, nothing more, nothing less. You expect us to grant you membership after this display? I expect you to consider it on fair terms, which is all I ever asked." Zorath looked at the observation dome, at the dark shape of the Sovereign hanging in the space beyond, and then he looked at the 6 dead cruisers drifting nearby like discarded toys, and then he looked at Catherine Bishop, who stood 5 foot 6 inches tall and weighed 130 pounds, and had just fundamentally altered the balance of power in a galaxy that had not changed in 9 millennia. He said nothing for a very long time, and in that silence I understood that the real negotiation had finally begun. The hours that followed were the most intense of my career, and I had spent a decade in situations where the wrong word at the wrong moment could end lives. This was different. This was not about a single engagement or a single decision. This was about the future of every human being who would ever look up at the stars and wonder whether there was a place for us among them. The conclave went into closed session. Catherine and I were escorted to a holding room adjacent to the assembly chamber, a sparse space with smooth walls that curved in ways that suggested the architects had not been thinking of right angles, and a single bench that was clearly designed for a species with a very different relationship to sitting. We managed to arrange ourselves side by side, and for the first time since we had arrived at the station, Catherine let the mask slip. She leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes, and I saw the exhaustion that she had been carrying beneath her composure for 4 days. Her hands, which had been steady and controlled in the chamber, even while facing down a 3-meter Draelith, who could have ended her with a single motion, trembled slightly in her lap. The muscles along her jaw were tight, and there were fine lines at the corners of her eyes that I had not noticed before, the kind that come from sustained tension held for too long. She was not a soldier. She was not trained for prolonged psychological pressure the way military personnel are conditioned to endure it. She was a diplomat who had just gambled the future of her species on a combination of patience, nerve, and a 2-kilometer warship she had not been permitted to mention until the last possible moment. And the gamble was not over yet. "How did you know?" I asked her quietly. "Know what?" That they would react with threats instead of genuine negotiation, that they would push us to the point where the sovereign became necessary. She opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling, tracing the alien geometry of the room with a gaze that seemed far away. "I did not know for certain, Nathan. That is precisely why I waited 3 days. I gave them every opportunity to surprise me, every chance to offer something genuine, something fair, something that would have made this unnecessary. But the integration contract confirmed what our intelligence analysts had predicted since we first intercepted their communications. The conclave does not admit equals, it absorbs inferiors. It has been operating on that principle for 9,000 years, and in 9,000 years, no one has ever given them a reason to question it. And if they had offered fair terms on the first day? If Zorath had extended genuine partnership without the framework?" She smiled, and it was a tired, honest smile, the first truly unguarded expression I had seen from her. "Then the sovereign would have stayed where it was, parked in deep space at the edge of a system nobody was watching, and nobody in this room would ever have known it existed. I did not want to use it. I need you to understand that. The best outcome was always the one where we never had to reveal it, where diplomacy worked because it should work, not because a warship forced it to. But you did not believe that would happen. I hoped it would. I planned for the probability that it would not. Those are different things. I understood, and I believed her. But understanding and believing did not change the fact that right now, on the other side of that wall, 12 species were deciding whether to accept us or fight us, and the wrong decision could set off a chain of events that neither side was prepared for. What happens if they vote to attack? I asked. Catherine opened her eyes fully and looked at me. They will not. How can you be sure? Because the Sovereign disabled 6 cruisers without causing a single casualty. Every military mind in that chamber is now running the same calculation. If one pulse can neutralize 6 ships in under a second, how many ships would the Conclave need to commit to overwhelm the Sovereign? 100? 1,000? And how many of those would go dark before a single weapon found its target? The math does not favor aggression, and these species, for all their arrogance, have not survived 9,000 years by ignoring mathematics. She paused, and something darker moved across her expression. There is also the political calculus. The Conclave governs 400 subordinate species, civilizations that accepted integration because they had no other choice. Those species are watching this moment very carefully. If the Conclave attacks Earth and fails, every subjugated world in this sector will see it as proof that the Conclave can be challenged. Zoroth cannot afford that precedent. The cost of failure is not just military, it is structural. It threatens the entire framework that keeps the Conclave in power. I sat with that for a moment. You thought about all of this before we left Earth. A great many people thought about all of this before we left Earth. I am the one standing in the room. But behind me, there are thousands of analysts, strategists, diplomats, and military planners who have been gaming every possible scenario for decades. This moment has been rehearsed in simulation more times than I can count. The only variable we could not control was whether the Conclave would choose pride over pragmatism. And you think they will choose pragmatism? I think enough of them will. We waited 3 hours. I paced the room. Catherine sat still. We did not speak much after that initial conversation, each of us processing the situation in the way our training had taught us. I ran tactical scenarios in my head, calculating intercept times and weapon yields and defensive formations, the habits of a military mind that could not stop planning for contingencies even when the outcome was already decided. Catherine simply sat with her eyes closed and breathed, slow and steady, conserving her energy for whatever came next. Then Scialis came for us. The Valori delegate entered the holding room alone, moving with that liquid grace that made every other species in the galaxy look clumsy by comparison. Scialis's bioluminescence was muted, cycling through slow, thoughtful patterns of gray and pale blue, and those large, dark eyes carried an expression I had come to recognize over the past 4 days. Curiosity. Genuine, deep, unguarded curiosity that had nothing to do with politics, and everything to do with wanting to understand something truly new. The Conclave is divided, Scialis said without preamble. 5 delegations support immediate acceptance of Earth's terms. They see the strategic advantage of alliance with a species that possesses the Sovereign's technology, and they recognize that a willing partner is more valuable than a reluctant vassal. 4 delegations, led by the Dralith, want a military response. They believe that allowing Earth to dictate terms through what they call coercion will undermine the Conclave's authority and encourage other subordinate civilizations to challenge the existing order. And the remaining 3? Catherine asked. Abstaining, for now, waiting to see which direction the wind settles before committing themselves. Scialis paused, and the bioluminescent patterns shifted to something brighter, warmer. I am one of the 3, and I have come to tell you why I have not yet voted. Catherine straightened. We are listening. Commander Cole, Scialis said, and I was surprised to be addressed directly. In the banquet hall, I asked you whether your species was brave or hiding something. You did not answer. I would like an answer now, because my vote depends on it. I looked at Catherine, She nodded, a small, clear motion that said, "This is yours." "Both," I said. "We were both." Salus's colors flickered. "Explain." I thought about it. I thought about the olive branch, stripped of weapons, crossing 400 light-years of hostile space with nothing but a hull and a hope. I thought about Catherine standing on that floor, while 12 species laughed at her, absorbing the humiliation without breaking stride. I thought about the Sovereign, hidden for 78 years, built in secret by people who hoped with everything they had that it would never be needed, who poured their lives into constructing the most powerful warship in the galaxy and prayed every day that it would never leave its berth. "We came here brave because we believed that showing good faith mattered," I said, "that arriving unarmed at a table surrounded by armed strangers was the right thing to do, even if it was foolish, even if it cost us. We believed it because that is who we are. We talk first. We always talk first, even when we know the other side might not listen." I paused. "And we hid the Sovereign because we knew that good faith might not be enough. And we loved our people too much to leave them unprotected on nothing but a hope and a handshake. We did not want to threaten anyone. We wanted to make sure that no one could threaten us. There is a difference between carrying a weapon and pointing one, and we needed this galaxy to understand which one we were doing." Silas was quiet for a long time. The light patterns across the Valori's body slowed, deepened, and then bloomed into a warm, golden glow that I had never seen before from any Valori in any context. It was soft and steady and profoundly beautiful, and it filled the holding room with a light that felt almost like warmth on the skin. "In 9,000 years, Salus said softly, "no species has entered this station and tried to talk first. Not once. Every civilization that has ever stood before the Conclave arrived with weapons drawn, with fleets at their backs, with threats on their tongues. They earned their seats through intimidation and force, and the Conclave accepted them because the Conclave was built on the assumption that this is what strength looks like. That power is the willingness to destroy." Salus moved closer, and the golden light intensified. "Your species is the first to walk through those doors and offer peace before demonstrating power. The first to endure mockery with grace, rather than responding with force. The first to hold what may be the greatest weapon in this room and choose not to use it until every other option had been exhausted. That is not weakness, Commander. That is a kind of strength this conclave has never encountered." Salus looked at Catherine. "Ambassador Bishop, the Valori will vote in your favor, not because of the Sovereign, because of the olive branch, because you came to talk, and you meant it, and you kept meaning it, even when we gave you every reason to stop." Catherine's eyes glistened, and she nodded once, quickly, before her composure could crack any further. I saw her swallow hard, and I looked away because some moments are too personal to witness, even between people who have spent 4 days side by side in a situation that would have broken most partnerships. The vote was held that evening. The full conclave assembled in the chamber for the final time, every delegation at full strength, every seat occupied, the observation dome showing the Sovereign still hanging in space, silent and dark and patient, a reminder that the conversation had changed in ways that could not be reversed. Zorath called the vote with visible reluctance. His voice was formal, stripped of the condescension and amusement that had characterized his interactions with us for the past 4 days. He read the motion aloud, his mandibles clicking through each syllable with the precision of someone who understood that words spoken in this chamber would echo for centuries. Full membership for the species designated human. Equal rights, equal protections, full voting privileges, full trade access. The first new admission to the Conclave of 12 in over 2,000 years. The votes came in one at a time, each delegation announcing its position through its senior representative. The Cathari voted yes, their stone-faced delegate, inclining his heavy head toward Catherine as he spoke. The Torvan voted no, their rumbling voice carrying a weight of disapproval that made the floor vibrate. The Valori voted yes, Saelis pulsing gold as the word was spoken. The Selkari voted yes, the Drenari voted no. Species I had barely interacted with declared their positions, and I stood behind Catherine and counted each one, my heart hammering so hard I was certain the delegates in the front row could hear it through whatever sensory organs they used to detect sound. 7-5, In favor. The chamber did not erupt in celebration. There was no applause, no cheering, no dramatic moment of triumph. The conclave was too old and too proud for theatrical displays. Instead, there was a settling, a recalibration, a barely perceptible shift in the atmosphere, as 12 ancient civilizations adjusted to a new reality that they would be processing for years to come. A 13th seat would be added to the council. A species that had been laughingstock 4 days ago would now sit among the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Not because they had conquered anyone, not because they had fired a single shot, because they had shown up, taken every blow, and refused to become what everyone expected them to be. Zorath approached Catherine after the vote. He was stiff, formal, and his mandibles moved in tight, controlled patterns that suggested he was choosing his words with extraordinary care, each one weighed and measured against thousands of years of Draelith pride. He extended one clawed hand, palm up, in the Draelith gesture of formal recognition, the acknowledgement of a peer. Catherine placed her hand in his. It was absurdly small against his armored claw, and the contrast was so stark it almost looked like a different kind of art, a painting of everything this moment represented. The impossible smallness of what we were, and the immeasurable weight of what we had just achieved. Zorath leaned down, close enough that only Catherine and I could hear, and he spoke quietly. "Ambassador, how long until your species builds a second sovereign?" Catherine looked up at him, and the smile that crossed her face was the smile I had seen on the first day, patient, knowing, carrying a weight of information that the room was not yet ready to receive. "We already have, High Speaker." Zorath's compound eyes widened fractionally, the fractured light within them flaring for just a moment before he controlled it. Then he straightened, released her hand, and walked away without another word. I watched him go, that towering figure retreating across the chamber floor, and I wondered whether the Draelith had a physical expression for the moment when certainty collapses and the universe becomes larger and stranger and more complicated than you thought it was. We left Conclave Station that evening. Catherine and I walked back through the same corridors we had walked 4 days earlier, past the same species who had ignored us, past the same docking bays full of warships that now shared their sky with something they could not explain or predict or dismiss. But this time, the beings in the corridors did not look through us. They stepped aside. They nodded. A Cathari officer inclined his heavy head as we passed, and a group of Selkari diplomats paused their conversation to watch us walk by with expressions I could only describe as reassessment. Not admiration, not fear, something in between, the look of people who are seeing something for the first time and have not yet decided what it means. We boarded the Olive Branch, and I stood in the observation lounge as the ship undocked and began its long journey home. Through the viewport, I could see the Sovereign falling into formation alongside us, that vast, dark shape moving through space, with the quiet confidence of something that knew exactly what it was, and exactly what it was for. It dwarfed our little vessel completely. From the lounge window, I could see only a fraction of its hull, a curving expanse of adaptive plating that shifted and shimmered in the fading light of the red dwarf star. Catherine joined me at the viewport. She stood beside me and watched the stars, and for a long time neither of us spoke. The silence was different now. It was not the tense, loaded silence of the past 4 days. It was the quiet that comes after something has been accomplished, the settling of dust after a structure has been built. Then she said, "They did not lose today, Nathan. Nobody lost. That was the whole point." I thought about that. I thought about the laughter on the first day and the silence on the last. I thought about Saelace and the golden light of Valori respect. I thought about Zorath and the question he had asked and the answer he had received, and the look in his compound eyes when the universe became bigger than he expected. "You planned this from the beginning," I said. "Every step, the unarmed ship, the patience, the 3 days of sitting through their contempt without breaking. The Sovereign arriving at exactly the right moment, after you had demonstrated that force was not our first instinct. All of it. I planned for the possibility," she corrected gently. "I hoped for something better. Every day in that chamber, I hoped that one of them would surprise me, that someone would stand up and say, 'Let us hear what these humans have to offer,' that the conclave would live up to the ideals it claims to represent." She paused, But I planned for this. And the second sovereign? She glanced at me, and there was something in her expression that was neither pride nor satisfaction, but something quieter and more complex. Relief, perhaps. The relief of someone who had carried a secret for a very long time, and could finally set it down without the world ending. There are three, actually, she said, but Zorath does not need to know that yet. I laughed. I could not help it. Standing in the observation lounge of a converted science frigate, escorted by the most powerful warship in the known galaxy, having just watched a 53-year-old diplomat talk her way into rewriting 9,000 years of galactic history, I laughed. It came out of me like something that had been compressed for too long, and once it started I could not stop it for a good 10 seconds. Catherine smiled. Not the diplomatic smile. Not the patient smile. A real one. Then she patted me on the shoulder, said good night, and walked to her quarters with the unhurried stride of someone who had earned every step of rest that was waiting for her. I stayed at the viewport and watched the Sovereign keep pace beside us, that impossible vessel moving through the dark, with a silence that felt almost reverent. And I thought about what Saelis had said, that no species in 9,000 years had ever tried to talk first. That every civilization before us had arrived with weapons and threats, and the assumption that power was the only language the galaxy understood. We had come differently. We came to talk. We came unarmed. We came hoping that the galaxy would meet us halfway, that somewhere in those 9,000 years of hierarchy and dominance and forced integration, there was still room for something new, something fair. And when the galaxy did not meet us halfway, we did not abandon our principles. We did not become conquerors. We did not threaten or demand or force anyone to kneel. We simply proved that we could, and then we asked, one more time, for the thing we had been asking for from the very beginning. A seat at the table, an equal voice, a chance. They expected diplomacy, and they laughed. Then the battleship showed up. But the part they will never fully understand, the part that separates humanity from every civilization that came before us, is that the diplomacy was always the point. The sovereign was never the strategy. It was the insurance policy. The guarantee that when we offered our hand in peace, nobody could afford to slap it away. And now, for the first time in 9,000 years, someone new was sitting at the table. Not because we demanded it, not because we conquered it, because we earned it. One unarmed ship and one steady voice at a time.